meeting to order. Mayor, it's all yours.
Perfect. Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. Council, as you may recall, back in December, we brought up kind of the current jail situation along with the kind of letting you know that we had been investigating a community alternative sentencing center, which is kind of Candace will go into the details, but a misdemeanor type facility where individuals can come, receive treatment, can get counseling services, can come and go with different restrictions to be able to go to work and kind of go about life while also serving out their term. So it helps alleviate some stress on the jail facilities, but also kind of helps people with all of the other aspects of their lives as well. Because we recognize individuals that are typically involved with law enforcement typically have some other issues going on as well, mental health, addiction, etc. So tonight what we wanted to do, one, I wanted to give you a brief update on kind of the jail situation and some of the conversations that we've been having with the county related to steps we've been taking, as well as then have Candace give you an overview of the Community Alternative Sentencing Center. Committee of the whole is really just a discussion. No votes are being taken. No action is being requested tonight. This is truly an update for members of the audience. You really can't ask questions unless council asks you a question. So as we're going through, please feel free to interject or ask questions, but we'll try to leave some time at the end as well. So just a quick update, because it all is part of this CASC conversation. Obviously last week there was some issues related to inmates being not accepted at the Hancock County Jail facility. This has really been a multi-month issue. Back in December when we came to you and said, listen, the jail is experiencing staffing issues. They're needing to look at decreasing the level of inmates that they are housing. We started making some changes on our side, but they also then slowly started changing the policies of who they would accept. They released in early January that they were only receiving a couple of different things related to felonies and violent offenders, and then that kind of led to a couple of the offenders over the last couple of weeks being turned away. And then last week we made the decision in the press release to make it clear that they were turned away from the jail because of the current policies and the issues that the jail was experiencing. We did have a productive conversation this morning with the commissioners and the sheriff related to kind of that situation and some of the larger concerns around jail operations. There's really not a short-term solution to what they're currently experiencing with staff issues, recruiting issues, operational issues. But the biggest message to them from myself was, hey, this is important for the entire community and we're here to help, and we recognize this is not easy, but we need to make adjustments because having folks out on the street that should be in jail is unacceptable. So jumping back to kind of where we were, we back in December received your authorization to enter into independent agreements directly with other counties to house inmates. Previously, we were always working through the sheriff, but we're experiencing some issues there getting inmates accepted and taken to other counties. So it's taken a little while for us to get those agreements executed for a variety of reasons. We do have an executed agreement with Seneca County. I would expect that we'll have one any day with Putnam County, and then also with CCNO out of Stryker up in Williams County. That looks like we'll probably have about 60 beds available, maybe a little less. It kind of fluctuates, but 30 to 60 bed is our goal. So that should really help. Obviously, there's some operational nuances of getting people to those locations depending on which facility they're going to, and a couple of them do have restrictions around mental health, any serious medical conditions, things like that. But I'm optimistic that we're going to start seeing us being able to move more of those folks out. And again, not a cost burden at this time because we are actually contracted for a lower rate than we're currently paying the sheriff. So I think we're going to be between $70 and $75 with each of those contracts compared to our $112. The most important question that we're still kind of waiting on an answer from, and had again a little bit of a productive conversation this morning, is what the city would like to see if we do move forward with the Community Alternative Sentencing Center is us locating it out on County Road 140, where the county has a number of properties already out there. They own a large area that currently is available to be built out. That is a property that had previously been discussed as a future jail location. And we think that it really makes sense for any community alternative sentencing center to also be on that property so that we could have shared services, food, laundry, etc. The jails would not be attached, and we are not asking the sheriff to operate the jail. It would be independently operated. We still have to work through those details, but we can kind of share some other models and kind of what we've seen. Any questions so far on what I shared? Yeah.
If they do move the jail out there as well, what are they gonna do with the current one?
That would be kind of up to the county on how they move forward with it. There's been a couple of high-level discussions. That's still, even if they decided today that they wanted to build a jail, I would expect that would not happen for 3 to 5 years. So I think that there's opportunities to utilize that facility, but I think it'd be pretty costly really to retrofit it for anything. At one point, they had kind of wanted us to use that potentially as a facility for the cask, but I don't think operationally that makes sense because of the cost to operate it. Go ahead.
Does this mean that the discussion or talks are over with regards to the old shopping center?
So that was not
A location that we were looking at for the cask, that was not a location that was being looked at for the jail facility either. That was being looked at for the probation court and other county offices, Board of Elections, et cetera. It is, based off of my most recent conversations with them, I don't believe that the county is looking to move forward with that option.
I remember you mentioned that there were alternative, I forget the term that you used, venues on 140. Does that mean that it is an independent entity that would operate that? Are there third parties that come in that do this as a business?
So there are companies that come in and do this. At this point, that's not really something we're looking at doing because we believe that we would be able to best manage it at a lower cost. We're not trying to turn a profit necessarily from it. But what we are not saying is that we should believe the sheriff's office should do it. So Candace can probably talk a little bit more. One thing that is important to note is that what we've seen in a lot of these facilities is that they have an area designated for that treatment and mental health and counseling services outside of kind of the dormitory type jail environment, which you can partner then with outside agencies to come in and provide those services.
You sort of touched on when you said that when you used the word, we were looking at other alternatives. And then you said, but it wouldn't be the county necessarily. So we'll address that later.
Well, alternative locations. So if for some reason the county says we can't use County Road 140, we'd obviously have to reevaluate where we could locate it.
And when you use the word we,
The city of Findlay.
okay.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I should be more clear. Other questions before I hand it over to Candace?
Here's that. Were the two individuals, or the two incidents over the last week, were they incarcerated or not incarcerated?
They were turned away from the jail, and then Mr. Moreno was later picked up by Putnam County Sheriff's Office on other outstanding warrants. And then at this time, it's my understanding that, I believe his name is Hickler, we have not been able to verify that he's currently incarcerated.
Do you, the city administration, the police department, feel comfortable moving forward if there's an incident in the future, and if the sheriff turns away, where we can find housing for them?
I believe that the sheriff has heard loud and clear that if there is a similar situation and we are very firm that they need to be incarcerated, that they will find room in the sheriff's office, or we will be taking them somewhere else. And I would expect that with CCNO, we contacted them Monday, and they are pretty ready to get an agreement executed. So my hope would be by the end of this week, we would have that as an option, and they're willing to take fresh arrests. Anyone want to add or correct anything I say? I figure if I say something wrong, you'll throw something at me or interrupt me. So, all right, Miss Candace Griffith, who is now. Let's tell me the new title.
Assistant Chief Probation Officer.
Yes, the lady in charge of the cast. She's done a lot of the research and information gathering on this.
Okay, so the mayor has just asked that I give kind of a brief overview of the CAST project and then an update as to where we are with the project. So first things first is the Community Alternative Sentencing Center is already established in the ORC.
There's no governing or accrediting bodies that oversee this type of facility, so it's strictly governed by a city or county board that establishes it within their jurisdiction. It does count as jail time, so it can count as your state mandated time for OVI and driving under suspension offenders that you hear us talk about quite often that cause a lot of clog in our system right now with not being able to serve that time at the jail. So it is a direct sentencing option. It can be a work release. We save a lot of money by not having to follow the minimum security for jail standards. So the Bureau of Adult Detention has standards that makes running a jail very expensive. This is the next best option to a jail. It lets people serve jail time with avoiding a lot of the cost that goes with it for our more low-level offenders. It has a maximum 90-day term. Our target population is any misdemeanor offender post-conviction. It would be nice to expand the legislation to kind of combat TCAP at our local jails by letting in the F5 nonviolent drug abuse offenders that are crowding our jail right now. This facility would be appropriate for them, but the legislation doesn't allow for that right now. So it would be nice to expand that in the future. But as of right now, it's post-conviction misdemeanor offenders. So it would target our state mandated time for OVI and driving under suspension offenders, as well as other scheduled jail commitments. So we have a lot of offenses in our misdemeanor court, such as menacing, assault, domestic violence, civil protection order violations that result in commitments at the jail that people need to serve. But in looking at that, these are people that are already in our community that are showing up to serve their jail time. So at a facility like a CASC, they would be appropriate. Same for our probation violators. They're long stay offenders at our jail because we've usually tried a lot of different options with them before they end up at the jail. So yes, our probation violators may start at the jail, but they could be qualified to be transferred into a CASC where we could really surround them with services and get a good case plan set up for them before their release. And again, these are offenders that are already in our community that we need to give a higher level of supervision. We have a lot of offenders picked up on warrants that are for not complying with program or treatment, and those are oftentimes a longer stay, and the CASC would allow for us, after they're in the jail, to qualify those offenders to be transferred to the CASC to serve their time and potentially have an opportunity to complete those treatment programs we want them to complete. We know from the jail study that a lot of the individuals in the jail are nonviolent drug abuse offenders. So we'd really want to target those offenders with our programming at the CASC. But the CASC is not meant to be a rehab, and I don't want people to think that that's what it's for. It's a detention facility. Yes, we're going to try to provide these people programming while they're in there. It's mandatory. We're going to really surround them with our community services and be a central hub to get these offenders those services, whether that's signing them up for housing, getting them involved in treatment, getting them signed up for rehab and working to get them transferred to that rehab, and a lot of different services that we have here locally. Something even as small as, hey, I can show you how to get your license back and the steps you need to take to do that, and I can help you make a job resume. So just little things that seem very little, but when they're out using in their everyday life, it seems like a really insurmountable project for them.
Candace, when you're talking about surrounding these, or having services available, and maybe this will be part of the presentation, are you talking that there will be city staff that will be providing these services, or is this going to become a place where the community services that already exist for these types of situations, they're going to be able to have space at this made available?
I'm not necessarily saying they would have space. We would have a schedule, obviously, like a treatment schedule where different community services can come in and share what they're able to offer. I believe that Adamus Ford plans to work with us on providing treatment staff to come in and work with these offenders one-on-one as well. So it's not that we would have city staff that we would be hiring to provide this treatment. We would already be utilizing the resources that we already have in our community.
Okay, thank you.
The first question that I always get with the CASC is how does it differ from the work release center that we had in the past. The work release center, I used to sign people up for that, and you had to pay an upfront $125 to $175 fee depending on the length of your stay. And I would constantly be rescheduling people because they couldn't come up with that money, which would end up and then just giving up and serving their time at the jail. The CAS would not, their fees, this hasn't been decided yet, but their fees would probably be added to their jail costs just like the jail costs are. So upfront, they would not have to pay any money. At the work release center, you had to have a job. You could not just be at the facility. This facility is going to allow for us to work with people to get jobs while they're at the facility, and they don't necessarily have to be employed while they're there. When you entered into the work program, you could not test positive for any narcotics, but THC was always the one that caused us issues because it takes 30 to 60 days to get out of your system. And it was hard for individuals to have sobriety and plan for that stay at the work center, which prevented many from being able to enter. At the CAS facility, we would allow them to enter. We can keep them there if we want to, if we think they're using, until they test clean before we release them for work, or as long as we don't think they're using while they're at the facility, they can continue to stay. And that also differentiates the CAS from the work, that we can make up sanctions from within our facility because we are able to hold offenders there instead of having to make them leave every day for their employment. And also the work release center could not count towards state mandated time, so we were always having to coordinate their jail stay with their work referral, and then the jail couldn't take them, and it was always a convoluted mess when it came to lining those up so the CAS can count as both. So, in making this slide is when the jail was holding misdemeanor offenders. So, all of the bookings and the releases that they have to do with our commitments, it would get rid of all of those for the jail. That would all go directly to the CAS. And a lot of our long stay offenders could be evaluated as soon as they're through withdrawals, if they're having that, or maybe they could be evaluated and removed almost immediately to be transferred to serve any commitment they have at the CAS. Another positive is that for our long stay offenders, we won't be paying for their medical expenses. So at the jail, we have to pay those medical expenses while they're there. At the CAS, they'll be able to make those appointments. The staff can confirm those appointments, and they would be released to attend those on their own to their own doctor and pay for those themselves. Obviously, it's a plus that they'll be able to maintain their jobs, but then it's really a great resource for probation officers. Our peer support can enter and start working a case plan with an individual before they're released, and other social services will be able to enter and educate offenders, because a lot of offenders don't realize there's programs out there to help them. There are 4 facilities in Ohio that operate under the CAS statute. Akron is an old misdemeanor jail. They discovered at some point that, hey, if we call this thing a CAS, we can operate it a lot cheaper. So that's what they did, and they just operate their old misdemeanor jail as a CAS. Batavia is a wing of the jail. Neither one of these operate under the full potential of the statute, in my opinion. They just know that they can operate it a little cheaper by calling it a CAS. Marion at the Tri-County had a lot of overflow offenders.
They turned an old treatment facility, it's just a residential house almost, 15 females on one floor, 15 males on another, and hold their overflow and call it a cask. I don't know that that's still up and running, but it was as of last year. Mansfield, they have an old hospital that they converted to a cask. Half of their facility is work release, half of their facility is almost an inpatient center. So again, not really what we're trying to do. They have clinical supervisors, counselors, the whole 9 yards that they employ, and they build a Medicaid, and that would not be what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a detention facility. So we did take site visits, the judges and I and Mr. Beach, and we went to the Mansfield facility. Prescia was unable to attend that through the ADAMIS board, but she did come with us to Hamilton County, Indiana, which was actually probably the most interesting visit that we had. And They have a lot of community correction centers throughout Indiana. They have a very strong community corrections board, but they target felony offenders. That whole thing where the prison offenders roll back to your local jails, they use these community correction centers to get those felons out of their local jails and work with them. We did get to tour a new jail there, and that was really cool. But the most interesting thing about the visit was the idea of a justice campus. They had a really good relationship, their mayor, their county commissioners, their sheriff, working together and creating this 30-year vision of what this justice campus is going to look like and how it's going to expand as the need rises over the next 30 to 40 years. And I think we as a community have an opportunity right now to do that for our future, is if we all work together now, hopefully 30 to 40 years from now, we won't be having the same problem, and we'll have a really well thought out plan and how that can continue to expand. So this is just an example. It's really small, but starting with phase 1, they're only on phase 4 right now, but phase 5, the blue, is where they're expanding out to pods in the future. So when we talk about 140 being a justice campus, we want to have a whole vision in place that when we build this cask, we can expand it. When we build this jail, we can expand it, and we won't be where we are right now in the future. So our next steps are, we have a RFQ created that we want to send out, and the Findlay Municipal Court wants to fund kind of an initial design plan, because I've made some budgets and got around some numbers, but I feel like if we had that initial design plan, I'd have a lot better idea of what the operation costs would be and what our staffing need would be and what land, how much land we would need in parking and all that goes with it. So if 140 doesn't work out, we do have to look at other locations if we move forward with this, that we would have an idea of what we would need. We are continuing to identify outside housing locations for commitments while awaiting this facility potentially, and that is helpful. We're finding some really good outlets for that, but it doesn't help us with county cases or through the Ohio State Patrol or through the sheriff's office. It only helps us with city cases, which we appreciate and is a help right now. These are the numbers that were requested from me for council. We had 80 total misdemeanor bookings in January to the Hancock County Justice Center. 32 of those were city code or both, city code or state split. So 48 were charged under state code. That does not mean it wasn't a city case, though. A lot of our domestic violence cases are charged under state code, and other offenses charged under state code when they're associated with a long commitment, so that doesn't really designate whether it's a city or state case. We had 26 commitments scheduled for January, and they all were turned away. 5 of them failed to appear. So you could see how that issue just continues to compound. I don't know if you noticed the stacks of files on Mr. Beach's credenza when you walked by during your tour, but those are all warrants waiting to be issued for when we do have the jail beds. So I was asked a question by somebody, I'm not sure, about how many we have housed outside of the Hancock County Justice Center by the Hancock County Justice Center and in Mercer County, and I think we only have one because we haven't really had people there for long-term stays. So I think there's just one offender that was housed in Mercer from us. So. Any questions?
What's the security measures on this kind of a building?
They would not
be certified COs, it would be residential supervisors. I was thinking
I guess I'm, sorry. I guess I meant more like, you know, the building being locked or them not being out, because I mean, if they're leaving and then what guarantee do we have that they're going to come back? And
There's a lot to it. We plan to have like a locker room upon entrance where you would take your personal items and change into what you would wear at the cask. We would have a scanner, just like the sheriff's office does when people enter the facility to come in. We are thinking we would like to have it set up ideally in a pod style set up where control would be elevated and be able to see everybody in each pod at all times. When people would want to leave, they would need to sign out or buzz out, but we will have a camera system in place, and it would be time logged of when they left if it was out without permission to leave. But most people would have to turn in their schedule each week saying, these are the designated times that I'm allowed to leave, and that would be approved, and then for that week they could leave at those times. If they left outside of that and that would not be approved, if we get them back, we'd have to decide, are we sanctioning them from within the facility, or would we immediately issue a warrant and pursue that individual to be incarcerated at a jail?
One thing just to add to that, I'll come down here just because it's being recorded. I think it's really important for folks to understand that these are not individuals that we believe to have any risk to the community, right? These are individuals who have made a mistake, they're wanting to serve their time, and we need to create an environment for them to be able to do that. If we believe that they are a risk to the community in any way, they're gonna be in the jail facility, either here or somewhere else. And so, as Candace was saying, the maximum amount of time that somebody could be sentenced here is for a 90-day period. And there's kind of two options. Someone could be in the jail facility and then say, you know what, they've served their time, they're no longer a risk, whatever. Now they can go to the CASC facility at some level. Some folks may be there and not have the ability to leave for a while. Or there are people that, again, they had a DUI, they didn't show up to serve their time initially. The judges can talk about all the nuances, but in no way is there individuals that we believe to be a risk. These are individuals that need to just be cleaning their record up.
These are post-conviction offenders. So these are offenders that have already been released and already in our community, so they didn't comply with something, which has resulted in they needing to return to the jail or to the CASC.
So you mentioned 80. How would that factor in relation to the capacity of the CASC?
I'm sorry.
The 80. You mentioned 80.
Misdemeanors in January.
Oh.
Yeah. How would that factor into capacity? Would we have the capacity to take all 80?
That does not transfer into as for talking about the capacity, because those 80 people that have been booked into them as a misdemeanor are pretty much fresh arrest. So our fresh arrest would still have to go to the county because we're not going to have a medical team at this facility. That's how we're saving money. Those fresh arrests would have to go to a jail where we need to make sure that they're not withdrawing or having some other mental health issue that we can't handle at a facility like a CASC. They would have to qualify. So the capacity that we see for the CASC is post-conviction. So who are we trying to schedule in our jail for commitments? And we see that to being 50 people to a capacity that could increase to like 80 in the future.
I've got a real quick question.
And can you make sure to use your microphone, just because you're on?
I didn't realize it, sorry. These residents don't come and go then. I mean, if they need to maintain their employment, they don't check out in the morning, come back in the evening, or do they?
No, you would confirm their work hours to make sure that they're leaving when they need in enough time to report to work and getting back as soon as their shift ends. So that you would not be allowed to leave the facility unless it was approved by an employee before, like staff, before you went.
But they could do that and maintain their employment.
Yes.
Get
Yes.
permission to leave and come back.
Yes, that would be a great benefit of this facility.
Okay.
So then to follow that up, if they didn't return, then they would have, that's some type of offense. Would that then require manpower from either Findlay PD or some other source to find where they were, or how does that, how does that situation then happen?
That would just be considered non-compliance with the program. So if they didn't return to the facility, they would have been absconding from their residential supervision sanction. At that point, probation would then issue a violation and the judge would issue a warrant.
Couple questions. How big of a facility were, like, phase one? How many beds were you, and male and female?
Male and female, yes. Phase one, I would like to prove that we could fill a 50-bed
Facility with the option of, once we get to that point, expanding
to
clarification, my visual, back in the day, in the 90s, Bayward opened up their misdemeanor facility, the whole restaurant. They flipped it, they said, we need whole misdemeanors. So it was dormitory style, all male, beds were lined up in a row. 2 COs ran the facility. People just couldn't come in, they had to be vestibule buzzed to get in, they were patted down, searched, so no contraband, weapons, and anything could get in the facility. So I assume it's something very similar to that. They have to have a little rec area, a couple exercise bikes. Can be released, work-related. If they don't have a license, obviously somebody has to pick them up, sign them out, just to make sure they're being legal on that end. So assume it's very something similar.
Yes, very similar.
Thank you for the invitation.
Any other questions or comments from the judges or Rob or Chief Ring?
Just one other thing I wanted to note is, the
Sheriff
sheriff
did,
did, say that he's supportive of this
format.
format.
Additionally, this is something that as part of the overall jail study and that the county has been doing, they identified as a need as part of that as well. One of the takeaways from this morning's meeting with the sheriff and commissioners was that we're going to try to put together kind of a community steering committee tying back to this conversation as well as the overall jail discussion, and move that forward. I did make it clear, though, that we were going to continue to move down and further investigate this and not wait for the county to move on things, just because they need to build a little better track record before we hold up on things. But I think that is something that we'll be working on. They're well aware that we were having this meeting tonight, and that we were going to continue to investigate this as an option for the community. Additionally, as we've told the team, as further information presents itself, like CCNO and some of these other places, us investigating this is not a commitment that we are doing this. We still need to understand the return on investment for the community, the overall benefit that it provides, and it's, the feasibility. So this is kind of just continuing to move down the path to better understand how it would work and if it's the right move for our community. Yeah.
Is council's approval needed to spend money in order to do any of these initial studies? I'm always never 100% sure where the council's authority is over the courts, because I know that you all are special cases, and I say that.
They're very special. My understanding is, and we'll confirm with the auditor, but municipal court has money in their budget that they are willing to spend to fund the studies and design at this point. So no money is being requested of council.
Mayor, Candace, we talk about a facility like this that may go out on 140. Is that a foregone conclusion, or have we looked at other general areas, north, south, east, or west? Has anybody sort of critiqued that, or is it a decision that's already been made?
It is not a foregone conclusion. That is not the end-all, be-all. Again, that has been kind of our primary spot, because that has been where the discussions from the county has been for any potential future jail facility. And we didn't think it was appropriate to build a similar facility in a different area of town and then not have the opportunity for that cost saving and synergies related to food and laundry, et cetera. If you think there's a better spot in town, I'm all ears. We have done some preliminary looks and haven't found anything that we're like, oh yeah, that definitely makes sense, we should do it there. Yeah.
Thanks.
Candace, is there opportunity, if this is built, to then allow, for example, other municipal court districts to avail themselves of it? So could this, in essence, be regionally utilized?
Yes, we've done that in the past with our with our work release center that we had before, and if we had extra space, that would definitely be something that we would do.
Certainly, the surrounding municipal courts and around us, we have a pretty good, Judge Bishop and I have a pretty good relationship with our colleagues, and there is interest from our colleagues in utilizing such a facility like this. I know we just returned from a conference a couple weeks ago, and some of the other municipal court judges throughout the state that we were talking to have been looking at developing a CASC within their own community. They understand that this is probably the best way to deliver accountability to the individuals and also getting them the help that they need. And I just wanted to sort of underscore the point that in the slide showed that we had 26 commitments that were scheduled to go into the jail, and that number is, again, somewhat an artificially low number because we are dealing with reduced capacity, so we've had to be a little creative in sentences that we perhaps otherwise would not have imposed. And that was 26 people that didn't get in. Now 5 didn't show up, which is not unusual. So 21 people tried to present themselves to serve their sentence. They've been turned away. Now that's just going to compound for the month of February, and that just has a snowball effect. So having a facility such as the Community Alternative Sentencing Center would allow us to get these individuals into this facility to serve their commitment and to get their obligation to the court and to society taken care of and allow them to get back on with their life. Most, as we've indicated, most of the individuals that we deal with at the misdemeanor level aren't really bad people. They've had a bad run, had a bad night, had a bad month. Normally, they are amenable to getting back on track and doing and being productive. And so when this and their sentence is held over their head for months on end because they can't get in, we've talked about this before, they burn their vacation time, they can't take that new job, they can't do this or they can't do that. Not getting these people in a timely manner to serve their commitment, whatever that be, or getting them the help that they need for the treatment or the counseling is really just has a debilitating effect and certainly is not going to do anything to break that cycle if they are in a cycle of recidivism. So I just want to underscore the fact that we didn't get anyone in the jail on a commitment in January, and February is going to be worse than that, and it's just on and on. So again, the outside housing contracts that we've been able to get in place will certainly help alleviate some of that, but certainly that underscores what we're trying to accomplish with this type of facility.
Just to comment on what Judge Hackenberg said, there was a lot of interest when he went down to that conference in the whole CASC idea, and I think it's going to continue to grow in popularity because the traditional form of incarceration, which is absolutely necessary, is extremely expensive, and it's kind of overkill for some of these offenders. We don't need that type of facility. It's too expensive. We can do a lot for individuals with a much more cost-effective facility. So I could see the legislation expanding reference these facilities, and I can see them growing in popularity throughout the state.
Any other questions from council? Hearing none, we'll call this committee of the whole meeting closed, and note to council, hey, we're back here in 6 fun minutes to have our first of 2 public hearings. So don't go far.
Thank you.
Thank you.